Hey guys, this is Rose, and if you're listening to this, you found the Rose Quinn podcast. This is the Rose Quinn podcast.
Treasure rejection.
The community is so great. It's going to be like my breakout story that I realized I really didn't like where my life was.
Yeah.
And I was going to pursue my dreams.
The Rose Quinn podcast. This is the Rose Quinn podcast. Hey guys. Thanks for joining us for another episode. Today I've got some cool stuff for you. It is an author interview, and we've got the amazing Parker Peevyhouse with us this week. But first off, I want to talk to you guys. I've been reading, and if you follow me on Instagram, you know I've been reading this awesome science fiction book called Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. It was one I found randomly through one of my walks at Pal's before a movie with my husband, and the cover really grabbed at me, and I can't even remember which section it was in, but I think it might have been on an end cap, or I was walking through the aisles. I can't remember. That's how good of a memory I have. Anywho, it's an awesome book. It's in the future, so it's 5 years from now or something, but it was written a while ago, and it's about a entertainment company who sent out a ship to the Mariana Trench to film a mockumentary about ancient sea creatures. They were trying to find mermaids, and they actually found them, and this whole ship got destroyed and all the people died. And so it's about 10 years after that, and they're sending a second ship out to find it, and it's got definitely an interesting cast of characters, a lot of different types of people, but scientists. And it just reminded me, I like to read a lot of different genres, and I haven't read science fiction in a while, but it reminded me why I love science fiction so much. I love that I'm learning about science, but not in a serious, boring way. I feel like putting it in this sort of fictional world, but I think a lot of science fiction authors do their due diligence and understand what they're actually writing about. Some of them get to make up their own science, which I think is cool too, and what an imagination. But it's been cool to learn about, just more about the ocean, and it made me want to watch what I call ocean thrillers. The ocean is one of the most terrifying things to me because we don't really know what's down there. And I watched this shark movie, which is always a terrible idea, but then I got really scared because sharks are scary. When I first signed up for Kindle Unlimited, I read a couple really awesome science fiction series. One of them was The Second Ship, which is, the series is The Roe Agenda, but it's by Richard Phillips, and it's about this ship, an alien ship that's found in New Mexico, because everything creepy with aliens happens in New Mexico, and about these 3 high school kids who go out and accidentally find it and are given start to find out about all this alien technology. And it kind of goes back and forth between the 3 high schoolers and then more adult characters, and I think the balance is just awesome. I think it's something that somebody in high school could read, and I think it's also something that adults could read and enjoy. But I loved it. I thought it was really fun, and there were parts in there that got a little thick with science for me, but it was, a really great book series. And I think something what I love about science fiction, and I think a lot of people love about science fiction, is that it gives us ideas of, what the future could look like with different technologies, and kind of broadens our perspective on just thinking about ourselves, because this world is, so large, and there's, even just on our planet, we have so much, I was talking about the ocean, it's so big and so deep, we don't even know everything that's down there, and that's part of what the Into the Drowning Deep book is about. But I just, I found this quote too from Sarah Granger. You can find her if you just Google her name. She has her own website, and she said, the best sci-fi wrestles with ethical and philosophical issues of humanity's role and our survival, which I just think is, you wrap up something that's real and true and has a real, like, moral behind it in kind of like a fantastical world. And I think the best ones can teach you something without you really being, like, thrown in your face. Like, oh, here's this moral, please think about it. Definitely read Richard Phillips' books, The Roe Agenda, so good. Read Mira Grant's Into the Drowning Deep. I am obsessed with it. And my other favorite science fiction author is A.G. Riddle. He has a couple different series, but one of them that I just loved was Pandemic is the first book in the series. I think it's just 2, Pandemic and Genome. But it is about a deadly outbreak that starts in Kenya and it spreads like a pandemic. And it's about these doctors who are trying to figure out what's going on and how to stop it. And it's really tense, really awesome, and still teaches you that science, which I think always makes me curious just about how things work. And it's awesome. So I definitely recommend that one. Science fiction is my kick right now that I'm on, which is super fun, which ties perfectly in with our special guest today, Parker Peevyhouse. She's been writing since she was young and is the proud winner of a writing contest held and judged by R.L. Stine. Go to her Instagram, and she posts a picture of the letter she got from R.L. Stine. That's the freaking coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm a little bit jealous. My interview with her dives into her writing process, how she comes up with the amazing and unique ideas for her science fiction / thriller novels. We talk about her journey to finding an agent, which shows that sometimes the third time is the charm, which is very stereotypical, but to say, but sometimes it's true. Parker was a blast to have on the podcast, and I can't wait for you to hear more. I talked earlier about some of my favorite science fiction books, and Parker's most recent novel fits right in with all of this. I got an arc of The Echo Room by NetGalley, which is one of my favorite websites and where I get a lot of my books that I review, which is so lucky. And I loved The Echo Room. I've never read Parker's first book, but The Echo Room definitely made her catch my attention because it is such an awesome one. I'm going to go ahead and read you the blurb. Rhett Ward knows how to hide. He's had 6 years of practice at Wallingham, the state-run boarding school where he learned how to keep his head down to survive. But when Rhett wakes up and locked in a small depot with no memory of how he got there, he can't hide. Not from the stranger in the next room or from the fact that there's someone else's blood on his jumpsuit. Worse, every time he tries to escape, he wakes up right back where he started. Same day, same stranger, same blood-stained jumpsuit. As memories start to surface, Rhett realizes that the logo on the walls is familiar. The stranger isn't a stranger, and the blood on the jumpsuit belongs to someone or something banging on the door to get in. Ooh, doesn't that just give you chills, guys? I'm a sucker for books like this that are like the Groundhog Day. Did you see that? There was a movie about it where a girl like dies over and over, Death Day or whatever. So good. And Parker does this wonderfully. It is amazing. So I posted about this book on my Instagram, so check out my 5-star review at Rose Quinney. And now, let's get to know Parker Peevyhouse. Tell us a little bit about yourself, but then tell us kind of how your journey started with writing to being published.
Sure. So I work in a bookstore, an independent bookstore, which is an extremely fun job. I run teen events and order books in, and I also write a lot. I've been writing since I was really young, so I always wanted to be a writer. And a little while after college, I got an agent and a publishing contract, and I've just been hoping I can keep telling really weird stories and that people will keep publishing them. Yeah. That's pretty much my goal.
That's awesome. And I mean, I read The Echo Room. I haven't read your debut novel, but The Echo Room was awesome. And,
Thank you.
I loved it's just such a perfect mix of, young adult, but science fiction, and I thought it was great. I love weird stories like that because so many of them nowadays I feel like are very similar in a lot of the characters or just the story setup and all of that. So it's always awesome to read something that's different.
Yeah, it's fun to have those familiars that you can keep going back to.
Yeah.
But I really, really love any book that someone says, this is so strange, you should read it. That's the book I usually pick up. And I'm like, if anything is different, if anything's strange, if people are like, I don't know what to do with this, I basically will read it.
I love it. So tell us about that, first process querying and getting agents. How did that go for you?
The first agent that I had, I'm actually my third agent. So I just did the cold querying where I wrote a query letter to describe my book, sent it out to agents I had researched, and I ended up signing with an agent who sold my what was supposed to be my debut. And then we worked on revising. I worked on revising with my editor, but she just didn't like any of my revisions, so it didn't end up getting published at all, which was kind of a crazy thing. I don't think that happens very often, so I don't tell very many writers that because I'm like, don't worry, I don't think it'll happen to you.
Right.
But then somewhere in that mix, she passed me off to an agent at the agency because she was leaving agenting.
Okay.
And that agent and I, our tastes didn't really match up very well, so we also parted ways. And my third agent, the one I have now, it kind of found through a strange process. She actually emailed me and said, hey, I read some short stories on your website and I really liked them. Are you working on a novel? Do you want to send me something? And I was just really surprised, oh,
that's
okay.
Crazy.
Yeah, I don't think that happens very often either, to be honest.
I don't think so. I think you've had a very interesting agent journey.
Yeah, it's been a lot of, very surprising developments. So I sent it to her, and she really liked it. And I remember we talked on the phone, and I was like, do you like really weird stuff? Because I'm going to be writing really weird stuff. And, and, I just want to make sure that you're on board with that. And she said, I love really weird stuff. In fact, there are a lot of editors who have been in the business for a long time. And instead of saying, hey, I'm looking for a sports book or I'm looking for a dragon book, they're basically just saying, I just want something I haven't seen before because I've seen it all. Just send me something new. And she said, the stuff that you're writing is the stuff that I would send to them because it's something they haven't seen before. So I was like, great, that sounds like a good plan to me. So I signed with her and we're still working together and she's great. Joan Paquette, she's such a good agent.
That's awesome. I love this question and hearing different authors' answers because I think a lot of people who are trying and going through that querying process have a specific idea of how it's going to happen. And like your story, it's different than what somebody would be like, yes, this is how it's going to happen for me, like first agent, second agent. And how crazy that your agent was looking through the interwebs and found you and found your stories and reached out to you. That's definitely something that feels like it's meant to be for you.
Yeah, it was funny to have gotten an agent 3 different ways.
Yeah, that's so crazy. But I love those stories. I think it's good for writers who are wanting that to just realize it can happen in different ways. And if it's not happening one way, you just got to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised, too, what you end up realizing that you want or need in an agent. You might think, oh, I really want this, and that. They sold this book. I want that agent. And then you're on your third agent and you're like, okay, I know what I want. I want someone who loves weird and will also pull me back when I'm being too weird and is just going to go after a contract even when everyone's saying, this is too weird. We don't know if we want to publish this. And I remember at one point I said to her when we were trying to get Where Futures End published, it had been 11 months and I said, you know what? We really tried. It's okay. It's not going to happen. And she was like, wait. Hey, I'm not finished yet. We are going to sell this book. And almost exactly a year after she had first put it on submission, it sold. It actually went to auction, which was just so strange to me that after a whole year,
wow,
we had multiple people interested. But so she's very tenacious too. So just the things that you think you want in an agent might change when you're actually in that situation. So it's not always easy to tell.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's just experience and figuring it out as you go along.
And talking to other writers and saying what has worked for you with agents, what hasn't worked with you. Yeah. That can be really valuable.
Oh, for sure. And I think we have such a great, this industry and writers, I feel like, you know, most of them are wanting to be so helpful. They're not just wanting to hide their success and how they got it, but, you know, they understand that everybody loves what they're doing and wants other people's stories to be out there too. So I think that's what's wonderful about this industry too.
Yeah, and writers love talking about their experiences. If you happen to meet a writer and you're like, hey, tell me about, you know, how you got your agent. They're like, wow, settle in. Here's my story. People just love talking about it.
Right? So what would your tips be for writers who are in that querying process? What was really, you know, helpful for you all 3 times?
Well, the first time I queried, what was interesting is I had queried a different agent at the agency. And she had sent me a letter saying, hey, I actually passed your query on to an associate of mine because it's actually something that is all these elements that she's been looking for. And that was really surprising to me because I was thinking that I was going to get a response from one agent and she passed me on to a different agent at the agency.
Yeah.
But she was right because when I talked to that agent and we ended up signing together, all of our tastes just matched up so well. And so I was actually very grateful that she had said, look, there's somebody who's going to be a better match for you. And so I think just being open-minded and realizing that if you have this list of exactly which agent you want, you might be surprised to find that someone else can say to you, oh, you know who actually would be a good fit for you? And taking in their ideas. I had a friend who worked at SCBWI, and she gave me a lot of advice because she had met so many agents in person, and she knew me and she knew my writing style, and she said, you should actually query this person. You might not have thought of her, but she would be a good fit for you. She likes the kinds of things that you're writing. So being really open-minded to not being locked into one idea of what your agent should be.
I love that. I think that, that's... Because I think we read, like, their blurbs or what they say on their websites maybe without following their Twitter or something like that where they can give more recent or you can get to know their personality a little bit better. There's a lot of resources out there to do that. But I love it when an agent isn't just like, form letter, this isn't for me. That was really nice of her to pass you on.
Yeah, that was great. And I know a lot of people give the advice, be working on the next thing, but it's the only way that you don't go crazy. If you just really shift your focus away from your querying to writing something new. And what was really funny about my experience with that was when what was supposed to be my first book got canceled and my agent and I split. It was actually so freeing to be able to work on something completely what I wanted to work on and just think like, oh, I don't have a contract, I don't have an agent, I can write anything I want. And when you're querying, it's kind of the same thing because you're like, well, I've got the thing that I'm querying, but now I can do anything. I can do a really strange project that never get any traction. I can do whatever I want, and those passion projects usually end up being really good.
Yeah. One that you're like, okay, now that I finish this and I'm querying, I can work on this thing that's been in my head forever that I just need to get out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're like, I can't query this one anytime soon because I'm already querying my other one, and then it makes you feel like nobody's looking over your shoulder, you don't have any expectations, and that's when you do your best writing.
I love that. That's good advice. So my next question for you is, what is the hardest part about writing for you?
For me, the hardest part is probably feeling like I have no idea how anyone will respond to what I'm writing. I'm just like, I don't know, wouldn't it be cool to have this, alien come down, but the alien is actually a plant, and the plant is actually whatever. And and then I kind of come out of my writing cave, and I'm like, what have I done?
You're like, what are people going to think about this, though?
Yeah, like, is this coming across? So, of course, I send it to my critique partners, and sometimes they'll just say, don't know what's happening here. You gotta help me out. Or they'll say, like, yeah, I see what you're doing, just I think it could be a little bit clearer if you explain this a little bit more. So, it's like almost like when you are on a phone call and you can't hear your own voice. Your voice is just kind of going out there, and then you need someone to tell you
what you said.
If the sound is coming through. I just feel like I need constant checking against other people who are like, you're not accomplishing what you think you're accomplishing.
What I think is so wonderful, though, about science fiction is that you're able to just, like, push the boundaries and make it as weird as possible. Yeah, if you need to rein it in, that's fine, but that's what science fiction, what's so great about it, I think, is that it can be an alien that then is a plant that then is something else, you know? As long as you structure it right or make sure it comes across that way, I think you can go as weird as possible.
Yeah, that's why I love science fiction. It's a lot of like, oh, but how can I connect this to a trope that people will recognize so that I'm not just going way off the deep end, but I'm giving them something of like, okay, I know this territory, so I'm ready to explore something a little bit unfamiliar, and then we can come back to familiar territory, and then we can go out again. It's a hard balance to strike.
Yeah. Science fiction is one of my favorites, though. I read a lot of different genres, but I can't remember, and I shouldn't, bring it up if I don't know the title of it. But I remember this series of books that's basically like an alien ship crashes down to Earth, but it's about 3 teenagers who find it, and it goes back and forth between them, like, figuring things out about the aliens, but then their normal, like, teenage lives and dealing with parents and stuff, which is just such a great blend. I'll have to find it and tell you what the title is. It's a good one.
I think I would like to read that. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's a good one. So... on the other side of that, what is the hardest part of being an author?
I think just not knowing what to expect ever, because you can sign a contract and feel really optimistic, feel like you know exactly how this is going to be marketed and what their response will be, and you just never know. Or going to an event, and the event could have a ton of people, it could have 0 people. Like, you literally every day you're like, I have no idea what happened today with what I'm publishing or what I'm marketing, what I'm writing, if this contract is going to go through, if this contract's going to fail. It's really hard. So I just tried to be in this mindset of like ultimate flexibility and just constantly checking my expectations. But it's still hard. I did this teen festival, and I went in knowing that, like, I'm pretty new as an author. People aren't going to know me. And my book sold out. And all these teens were there to meet me. And I just couldn't believe it. But then I went to Comic-Con in Seattle, and people were like, don't expect anything. Don't expect anyone to line up to get your signature. And nobody did. There were like 3 people who lined up who wanted to get a book signed. And I'm like, okay. Like, it was still disappointing, even though everyone had told me.
Right.
But, like, I knew what to expect, but I didn't. And so it's always hard to be surprised in that way.
Yeah, well, you want, like, if the Teen Fest was so great, you're like, well, Comic-Con might be amazing, even if people are telling me it won't be.
Yeah, and so you're like, don't forget there's just as many downs as ups, but it's hard to tell yourself that, because you get so excited, like, I'm going to Comic-Con.
Right, that is so cool. Was it Emerald City that you went to?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
It was pretty fun. I had a lot of writer friends there, and we hung out and just saw, like, very cool artwork and costumes. So it's just a cool experience either way.
Yeah, you can just put it down on your list of things you've done. Like, was an author at Comic-Con. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So
yeah, and, like, I've not really been to a Comic-Con as just a person walking around. So it was kind of fun just to have those pockets of time to just walk the floor and see what people were coming up with. And yeah, I just love all the original artwork that you see. It's not really something that you have a chance to see a lot of in your daily life, just people's original artwork. So that was really cool.
I've been to the Portland Rose City Comic-Con, and it's amazing. The time and effort, too, that people put into their costumes and become art themselves is crazy. I have a friend who does it every year, and she spends hours and hours making costumes and all of that. They're pretty dedicated.
Yeah, it's a real craft. It takes, like, a lot of experience and skill.
Yeah. So, on the flip side of both of those questions, what's the best part about, being able to write and have your books published and be an author?
I really just like the writing part of it. I know a lot of people are stressed out by actually the writing, but I really love just exploring all the strange ideas in my head and seeing where they'll go. I just find it really fun, and it is kind of hard to get it into a finished project or product, because I love the starting out part where it's just like, I can write anything.
Yeah.
So then funneling that all into a completely finished project that will make sense to other people can be hard. But but just like the raw creation is really fun. And I also was very surprised because I've always wanted to be a writer since I was young, but one thing I never really thought about was that when you become a writer, you have this whole community of other writers, and it surprises me how much that has become an important part of this process to me, because I just really love meeting other writers, hearing what they're up to, becoming friends with them.
Yeah.
The community aspect is surprisingly one of the best parts of it. I never had expected that, but it is really it's really enriching to be friends with other writers.
Well, it's such a solitary thing that we do, writing. And so to be able to come together with all these people, and I feel that same way. I have so many people who I've met on Twitter through, writing hashtags and all of that, who have become friends in real life. That's kind of crazy. Something we all do by ourselves at early in the morning or late at night, and then you make friends with people who you haven't even sometimes met is pretty wonderful.
Yeah, there's a lot of writers who I've met online first.
Yeah.
I went to convention over the summer, science fiction convention, and I saw on Twitter that someone was going who I'd never met, but we tweeted with each other, and I just tweeted at her and was like, hey, if you're going to be there, maybe I'll see you, we can hang out. And we did hang out, we had so much fun. So it's funny how you can just, instant friendship, because you're like, you're a writer, I'm a writer.
Right, and what else do we need to know about each other?
I know, yeah.
I love it. So with your writing process, how does it work for you? Do you plan things out beforehand, or do you just sit down with an idea and start writing and then kind of figure it out later?
I really don't like planning things out, because then if I plan something out a lot, I get very bored when I'm actually drafting, and then I don't feel like the story ends up being fun.
Yeah.
So but I don't really just sit down right away. I like to spend a lot of time brainstorming, and ideally I would have like a couple of years to just play with an idea off and on. And then I like to make sure I know my characters. I mostly need to know what their hang-ups are, so that I know why the story is important to center on them. And then I try to have an idea of where the ending is heading, so that I'm not totally directionless. But I think people have described it before as like a headlights thing, where if you're driving a car and you can only see as much as your headlights illuminate, at night.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I write. Like, I plan out a little bit. Like, I think, okay, the next 10 or 20 pages probably are going to go here. And then I write it. And then I think about what the next chunk will be. So I kind of outline as I go, I think. But it was really interesting because my next book from tour, I had to write out a deadline, and I need to do a proposal to the editor. I had to write out this whole outline, but then when I wrote it, it really differed from the outline, and then I wrote a new draft and it was completely different again. So I don't think planning works for me.
Yeah, I've tried outlining before, and I got that same way where I was like bored with the story, because I'm like, well, what if I don't actually want it to go that way? But for some reason I felt like stuck to the outline because I spent so much time on it. But I'm very much just write what I like sit down every day and just write what comes out, and that requires a lot more work on the revision part of it, because I've got to figure out holes and how to tie things together that are missing. But I just that's a lot more freeing for me.
Yeah, and you really have to be okay with not being in control of the story, because you might sit down and think, I know what the story is vaguely about, and then as you're writing it, something interesting pops up and you take it in this direction that you weren't expecting, and you realize, okay, this story has something else in mind, and so you just can't really control what the overall story is going to be until it's finished, and then you can look back at what you've done and realize what you were going for.
Which I think is such an interest. I totally agree with you, and I think if you tell someone who's not a writer that, they get really confused. They're like, wait, you don't control your own story? You're like, no, your characters will do what they want. And they're like, I don't understand how that works. I love saying that to people, because I truly believe that I will have moments with my characters where I'm like, oh no, this is what they're about to do, and I cannot stop them.
I know, or I remember I was writing part of Where Futures End. It's made of 5 stories. So the 4th story, I just had in mind this boy who plays video games, and he encounters some strange things in this video game, and then just suddenly, right away, this best friend popped up. And I was like, oh, I wasn't really planning for that. Like, I've done a lot of brainstorming on the characters, and I don't really have a best friend character. And he ended up being so essential, and I felt like the ending of that story had so much more meaning because of their friendship. And it was so surprising to me that my brain was like, trust me, you're going to want this best friend character.
Right. It's so funny. It's just crazy the way it all works. It cracks me up. So I know you talked about how you've been writing since you were little. But how did that, love really start, and kind of what did that look like for you?
I would read all the time. I read so much. I was so shy when I was young. I'm not shy anymore. I was so shy when I was young. I couldn't talk to other people, and I couldn't play with other kids in the playground. I would just read all the time. And I just knew by the time 5th grade, we had an author's fair, young author's fair. Everyone had to write a book.
Oh,
and I wrote
cool.
a book, and I was like, this is it. This is going to be my life from here on out. So the funny thing is, when I was 13, I entered the short story contest where the author of the Goosebumps series, R.L. Stine, had written a few paragraphs of a short story, and then Disney Adventures had put it in their magazine and said, okay, you finish the story. So I wrote what I thought the story should be, and then he picked mine as the winning story, and they published it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm on my way.
That's crazy. I think I remember, I feel like you posted about that on Instagram. I feel like I remember that.
I posted a picture of his letter to me that was like, what a great ending, like, keep writing, and I was like, yes, R.L. Stine, I will. So that, and it was a weird story, and I loved weird Goosebumps stories, so it was kind of the start of my, I will now be a weird writer.
I love that. So we have R.L. Stine to thank for
yes,
you.
Thank you, R.L.
That's the best. I think, I've done quite a few of these interviews, and it's interesting to see, wow, my brain is not functioning. But I think where the love of writing starts is different for every person, much later in life or early. Like, I've been writing since I was, little also. But I think everybody's on their own path, and writing will find you somehow if it's meant to.
Yeah, it's interesting how many writers say they never thought about writing until, 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, and they're amazing writers. They're just like, I suddenly realized this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It is really cool. So my last question, actually, I have one more that I didn't put on my list for you, but I saw that you gave a TEDx talk.
Yeah, I had a school in the area was doing a TEDx event, so they invited me to do a talk. It was really hard. You have to memorize a whole speech, which I haven't done since school.
Oh my gosh, that would be so hard.
Yeah, I remember I wrote out my whole speech, and then I just kept it in my pocket, and everywhere I went, I would just be like practicing. I would read it or I would speak it. But I spoke on the future and like thinking about how stories shape the future and how the future shapes our stories. Cool stories about technology and things that are coming up, and the moral issues that it presents that we can write our stories about, and how we can explore kind of the moral side of technology.
That's so cool. I always, when watching those, thought that people read off a monitor somehow.
I don't think you can. I think you have to memorize it.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
or I mean, maybe some people are really good at just speaking from their heart in the moment, and not, I don't know, I think you have to have something like very prepared.
Yeah. Well, good for you for memorizing that, because that's one of my downfalls. I don't memorize things very well.
Yeah, I'm such a nerd. I actually love memorizing things.
That's
because
good.
Whenever I get bored, which is very often, I have a very short attention span. The thing I do to keep myself occupied is I memorize something. So I started in school, I would paste poems in front of my binder. And when I would get bored in class, I would just try to memorize the longest poem I possibly could. So I still do that now. I just memorize stuff when I get bored. It's so nerdy.
That's awesome, though. There's, it's a good, activity for your brain. Keep it active. Yeah,
I really love playing board games. And if you have a good memory when you play board games, it can really help your strategies.
Interesting. I will have to try and practice that.
And what's funny is, the Echo Room has a lot to do with memory, because in the story, the main characters wake up in this metal room. They don't know where they are. They can't remember anything. And every time they try to escape, they have to start over, but they can't remember what they did last time. So they have to start figuring out how to do these memory tricks so that they can, every time they start over, they can remember just a little bit more than last time. So I just have this sort of obsession with memory and losing your memory or remembering the wrong thing, or how can you remember better. So I feel like that comes up a lot, actually, in what I'm writing.
That's so cool. Now I'm just putting that together, but that's awesome. That's great. So one more question that I'm gonna just throw at you because we were talking about it, but I know you're in the revision process for your newest book that's coming out. So how does revisions, how does that look for you?
My revisions are usually very tricky because my first drafts and second drafts and third drafts are very like kitchen sinky. Just like throw it in if it seems cool.
Right.
And my editor at Tor, Allie Fisher, is so smart. She'll be like, hey, you have like 12 science fiction elements in the same book. Do you want to maybe narrow it down a bit? And so we'll talk about like, okay, so should we, should we keep this element and lose that element? Should we combine some elements? And I feel like a lot of my revision is just simplifying and narrowing down because if I can shed some extra tropes and shed some extra characters, I can go deeper with what I already have. So the book I have coming out next, Strange Exit, it started out with a lot of characters, a lot of main characters. There were like 3 friends who were main characters, then a villain, and then some important secondary characters. And it ended up just narrowing it down to one main character, and then the villain is actually more of like a anti-hero or just like a secondary hero, but with some flaws.
Okay.
So in doing that, I could really explore the dynamic of their friendship, and I could explore the issues each person had and why they're going through this particular problem in the story. So a lot of simplifying, cutting things down so that I can dive deeper into what is the most important core of the story. I was talking to another writer about this and how you have this idea of before you go into revision, it's helpful to know what your tent pole is, like what is holding up this whole crazy circus tent. Yeah. So if you're like, the most important thing to me is for the Echo Room, the most important thing to me was that they have this room that's like a puzzle they're trying to get out of, and whatever else is in the story has to serve that tent pole. And with Strange Exit, it was the idea that there's a girl who has this really unique skill, which is helping people realize that they're in a simulation. And whatever else happens and whatever the simulation ends up being and whoever else comes into the story really had to serve this idea that it would be really cool to see a girl who's good at that. Yeah. So cutting things down, but making sure that whatever your tent pole is, you don't chop it down, because then the whole tent comes down. Right. But it can be hard to figure out what that is. So you may have to take some time and sit with that before you revise to figure out what's the one thing I need to make sure is still at the core of my story.
Oh, I love that. That's great advice. How did, for your first book, the one that with your first agent that didn't get sold, how did you revise that, just yourself before querying? Did you spend a lot of time doing that?
Yeah, a lot of critique partners and just trying to work on feedback. I mean, I tend to have critique partners who have different skill sets. Yeah. So I have some critique partners who I make sure just really love science fiction and fantasy and can look at how I'm using those elements. I have this one critique partner, Emily Henry, who writes really great science fiction type stuff that is more emotional. And so I'm always like, can you please look at my manuscript and tell me where my characters should have feelings, because I'm such a cerebral writer. And she'll be like, well, I can see here that this person has died, and don't you want your characters to react? And I'm like, well, I feel like it's a given how you would react. And she's like, no, you got to say it. So having people who are really good at different things, and then I can kind of pass it through each of them to see, am I hitting the elements well? Are my characters developed and have real emotions? And then I have a one writer friend who's so good at prose, and she'll say, you really need to work on this paragraph. You can really do a lot more interesting prose here. So having different sets of critique partners.
That's awesome. I think critique partners are so crucial, and I found, I think people who don't have them should search out Twitter or Instagram, people who, are aspiring as well, because those are really helpful.
Yeah, I think some of my first critique partners I found through LiveJournal. Oh, yeah. When I used LiveJournal, we realized they posted about a lot of the same things, and I was like, hey, should we exchange manuscripts? And we were like, great.
Perfect. It's funny how you find those people that can be so helpful to your process.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Thank you so much for sharing about your story and your process. I think it's so helpful for people who are, just trying to figure it out and trying to get to the same place you are, to hear lots of different journeys. But what question I love to ask at the end is what your favorite book is right now. It can be one you read before. It doesn't have to be one you're reading right now, or it can be multiple books, because sometimes people can't choose.
Yes, I know. I've been thinking about this because I really loved Damsel by Alana K. Arnold, which is a fairy tale, but with such a clever twist, and can't really tell you the twist. I would spoil it, but it's about a damsel who's rescued by a prince from a dragon. And, of course, the damsel goes back to the kingdom, and it's, she's supposed to marry the prince, but this damsel is like, wait, I'm supposed to do what?
She's like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, she's like, who is this guy? and starts to sort of, like, investigate how she was rescued, and it's really interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, and the science fiction way that I'm kind of hung up on lately is Landscape with Invisible Hand by M.T. Anderson, which is, it's such a strange premise. It's a teen who lives on Earth in the future where Earth is just terrible, and these aliens have come and have this great alien city in the clouds, and he really wants to live up there where it's like cushy living. So to do so, he enters an art contest, but what the great dilemma is, to enter this art contest, he has to decide, should he produce art that is meaningful to him, or should he try to pander to the aliens?
Oh my gosh.
And produce art that the aliens will be like, yes, this is exactly how we think human art should look. Come live in our city.
Interesting.
It's like just the weirdest premise, and I can't imagine pitching it to an editor and having them be like, exactly, this is what the teens are ready for. But it's so good. I love it so much. It's really strange, if you like strange, and it's also it's a novella. It's very short, so.
Awesome. I will have to look that one up, because that sounds interesting, and I want to see what happens and what he decides.
It's also cool for a writer, because you're like, there's also this struggle with writing, like, should I just write the craziest thing I want to write, or should I try to remember my audience, or is there like a happy medium? So I feel like it's really good for writers to read it.
That's awesome, and probably a good example of just write what you want to write.
Yeah, and then you'll see where it goes.
Right. That's so wonderful. Well, Parker, do you have any last tips or one-liners that you would give aspiring authors?
I would really like to encourage writers to write what they want to write and not what they should write, and you'll be really surprised when you really dig into that, how much of your writing you think is what you want to write until you realize actually you're writing what you think you should write. Because you might feel like, oh, I love writing this genre or this trope or this element, so that's what I want to write, but you're writing it in a way that you feel like you just should write. And if you instead write it in the way you want to write, you will find some kind of magic. Some magic happens that makes your writing just go into a really cool place.
I think a lot of people get caught up in what is popular now, and then they're like, okay, I need to write something that's going to fit into that because it's popular now. But then by the time they're ready to query, it's all played out. Gone. Yeah.
Yeah. And if there is something that feels played out and you're like, oh, but I really wanted to write that and now it's played out, just do it anyway, because your take on it will probably be completely new and different.
Yeah, I have a finished novel that's like that. It's a little bit played out, the genre, and I think, which is sad to me because I love my story, and I think it's different. It has its different aspects. It's not the same thing that you've seen 20,000 times, but I think it's hard because a lot of agents just brief glance look at it and they're like, oh no, this is too dystopian, we can't do it. So
right. And sometimes it helps is just changing the label, because with the Echo Room, I know when we submitted it, some people called it dystopian and some people called it science fiction, but I've noticed that the way that Tor Teen markets it, they market it as a thriller. And I never thought of it as a thriller when I was writing it, but it is sort of a lot of edge of your seat moments.
It is, yeah.
And so, yeah, if they had tried to market it as a dystopian, I'm sure people would be like, what, dystopian? That's, so 10 years ago. But if they market it as a thriller is very hot right now, and people will give it more of a chance, and but then it brings a fresh spin to what a thriller is, because it has all these science fiction elements.
Ooh, Good thinking. Maybe I'll have to look at mine
and
change the label that I put on it.
Yes.
Well, I love it. Well, Parker, thank you so much for chatting with us and letting everybody get to know you a little bit more.
Yes, thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun talking about it. I hope there's something helpful and useful here.
I am sure there is. There's so many people who need to hear these stories.